Leah?
Yes, checking.
Yeah, they're
Good.
okay. Okay. Uh, Hi. Good evening. I'm Larry Young. Leah and I will welcome you to the lecture series, the lecture series. Uh, One of the pleasures of living in Waterville Valley is getting to meet our neighbors and getting to know more about them than just whether they are hitting the ball long and straight, whether it's on a tennis court or the golf course, or the ski conditions. As we get to know one another, this has been our finding and probably many of yours. We are always amazed at the variety of backgrounds, of interests, of hobbies, of professions, of avocations. And it leads to really the development of what really is quite an extraordinary community, intellectually as well as athletically. And tonight is a particularly good example of what the Race Center Lecture Series is trying to do, to try to get us to know one another a little bit better, and hopefully lead to conversations which will continue on for some time. Uh, Tonight's speaker, whom some of us have gotten to know rather well, is Dov Zakheim. Now, Dov Zakheim is quite an extraordinary person who has had major influence on the Defense Department, the acquisition and production of high tech airplanes. You know, I spent a little bit of time in the on advising the military on aviation and aircraft. You know, and so in addition to these little toys, I got to look into some of the secrets. And one of the things that I learned over the years was that the wars in modern times are not won by drones or by anti ballistic missiles. They're won by dollars. They're won by the correct infusion of vast amounts of funding where it will do the most good. And that, believe me, is not an easy decision to reach. And obviously, it's done better in some administrations. It's done better by some countries than others. Our speaker tonight is one of the world's experts on that specific topic. Dov Zakheim, who was born in New York and got his bachelor's degree at Columbia, went on to get a doctorate at Oxford and taught at the National War College, which many of you know about, is very prestigious and important. Taught at Yeshiva University, at Columbia, and at Trinity College, where he was a presidential scholar. He's written widely on topics of diplomacy, the arms race. He's been kind enough to put me on his mailing list for his political commentary blog, which is fascinating. Dubs was served in a number of positions in the Department of Defense during the Reagan administration, where he was Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Planning and Resources, and then later in the Bush administration, George W. Bush administration, he was appointed. Listen carefully. He was appointed Undersecretary of Defense Controller. That is no small potatoes. Uh, Dove chose a topic to talk to us tonight, uh, which is very courageous, like much of what he does. And before I give you the topic and whet your appetite, I want everybody to be aware that we have an exciting speaker next Friday when we return to our usual Friday at 7:30
Oh,
schedule. Next Friday, we have Marianne McGarry, who will be talking about sustainable solutions for resilient communities. Okay, so Dov is going to tell us about the current incoming administration and what we're likely to expect in the way of its effect on national defense. Dov?
Well, thanks very much, Larry. I had asked that you keep it short. You didn't. Um, so what can I do? You're the moderator. Um, as I told several of you, I wish I was back up there rather than down here in suburban Maryland. We don't have to wait for global warming. There's so much hot air in Washington, and it spills over to the suburbs that it's always warm here. and especially now. What I thought I would do is give you a sense of where I think the mess down here might be going, number one. Talk a little bit about how transitions work. Talk about some of the people that are being mentioned for Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and then talk a little bit about how Mr. Biden and Mr. McConnell might get along, Senator McConnell. And if you'd like, I could answer some questions about defense budgets and spending in Russia and China and all that stuff. My preference, although Leah asked me, and she was very kind to ask me to speak in the first place, but she asked me to speak for about 30 to 45 minutes. I don't know that I'll go that long for two reasons. In my experience, when you drone on for 45 minutes, people stop listening to you after about 30 anyway. And secondly, a lot of folks want to ask questions. And the most frustrating thing in the world is when you have a question you want to ask and, time's run out and you never were able to interact with the speaker. So my guess is I'll be speaking for about 20 minutes or so, and then take some questions. So if that's okay with you, Larry. And
That's fine, Doug. We're a small enough group that people can either raise their hand if I can see you,
yeah.
or just break in.
So where's this thing going to come to some end? It looks like Mr. Trump is never going to concede. That doesn't mean that he's not going to leave the White House. I think he will leave the White House. Most of his advisors are telling him to leave the White House because if he doesn't, if he harbors any dreams of running again in 2024, that'll destroy it. There are some folks who think he's going to call out the military. Well, for a start, there haven't been enough riots or big enough demonstrations to justify calling out the military. There's only one way he can actually do it. We have a law called Posse Comitatus, which means that the military cannot act as a police force. It's different from, say, in other countries, say in Italy, where you have the Carabinieri, which are kind of like a police force. In other places, we don't have that. The only way you can really call the military out is under the Insurrection Act. So there has to be an insurrection. Well, there hasn't even been a riot. And even apart from that, the military right now is very frustrated. There have been changes at the Department of Defense, and I'll go into that momentarily. They're not happy with the way Mr. Trump has treated the defense community, the military in particular. He's used all kinds of language that has really upset them. And General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who was part of that infamous march to church in front of Lafayette Square, where you might remember the president held the Bible upside down, which was interesting in and of itself. But of course, God is everywhere, so maybe he can read upside down. General Milley basically apologized for what he had done because he crossed the square wearing his uniform. And he's already made it clear that the military will not get involved in solving this political issue. He says it's for the Congress, for the courts, for the people, not for the military. He wants to keep the military, as it has always been, out of politics. So unless the president fires General Milley, and there's been rumors to that effect, which would have, by the way, a devastating impact on the people in uniform. You got to remember, we've got kids out in Afghanistan and in Iraq and lots of other places that are still being shot at. And all this stuff that's going on is certainly not helping morale. Maybe it helps the Taliban, maybe it helps other bad guys, but it doesn't help our kids' morale. And so I don't think the military will get involved here. Some people think the Secret Service will escort him out. Again, I don't think he's going to allow that to happen. So in the meantime, however, as you've probably read, the head of what's called the General Services Administration, that formally certifies that you can open up documents and provide information to the transition teams, has not certified that, and therefore they're not providing the information. Now, the thing about transition teams, and what is a transition team? A transition team is essentially a group of people. It begins at the top with the people closest to the vice president, in this case, to whoever is the winning candidate. And then there are a whole bunch of other people that get designated to focus on each major agency. So, for instance, in the Department of Defense, there's a transition team of about 20 or 25 people that are going to look at the issues. They're going to consider candidates for jobs that essentially will smooth the way for whoever comes in to take over the Defense Department. And that applies to state and Treasury and Interior and all the other agencies. Now, I was in the Bush administration, and I was an advisor to then Governor Bush. And of course, we waited 30 days before we even knew whether Mr. Bush would be president. And so what you then had was a kind of informal process, because there couldn't be a formal process. They couldn't certify Mr. Bush because, you know, they were counting those what did they call them, hanging chads in Florida, and it was decided by about 530 people, which by the way isn't the case today. We're talking about much larger margins of victory in most of the state, in all of the states where it looks like Biden's won. But you still had an informal process. However, Mr. Bush could not name and did not name his prospective Secretary of State or prospective Secretary of Defense and so on until around, you know, right after in December, when they finally got this thing sorted out. So Don Rumsfeld, who was my boss, he doesn't get named until December. He's only got 5 weeks or so to move in, as it were. He was going to get confirmed. That wasn't an issue, but he only had 5 weeks for transition. And I remember I was the first guy he actually told he was hiring. And we got together at the Four Seasons Hotel. And he started talking. He didn't even bother to hang up his raincoat. He had a room to himself, or a suite. Can't remember now whether it was a room or a suite. And we started talking about jobs. And I told him I could do this, I could do that. And he asked me to be his undersecretary for the budget. We then started talking about candidates for his number two. And we actually made a list of the prospective candidates. One of them was Paul Wolfowitz, whom he decided upon. Now, the thing about that is that the transition teams don't do that. They will deal with new appointees at lower levels, the political appointees. Our system is such that you can have 3 or 4 or even 5 levels of political appointees before you get to the top level. So the secretaries, or the prospective secretaries, they will, together with the White House, and when I mean together, sometimes they're together and sometimes they're apart, but the White House and the prospective secretaries, pretty much decide who the number two in their department's going to be. Cap Weinberger, for example, was my first Secretary of Defense. He wanted Frank Carlucci, who later became secretary, to be his deputy. The Reagan people, who were in charge of personnel, were hardliners, and they didn't like Carlucci because Carlucci, being a public servant, had served as an official in the Carter administration, and Carter was like, anathema. It was like this for the Republicans. But Weinberger basically said, I'm taking Carlucci because Carlucci had been his deputy in the past when he was at the Office of Management and Budget under Nixon. And Weinberger basically went to Reagan and Carlucci became deputy. So you can have a secretary who gets the deputy he wants. It was the same thing, by the way, with Rumsfeld. Rumsfeld chose Wolfowitz. The White House didn't. On the other hand, I remember Les Aspin, who was President Clinton's first defense secretary, whom I knew quite well. He basically almost had no control over any of the appointments. The White House controlled everything. So you don't know who's going to be in charge, but I guarantee you it's not going to be the transition team. And then, at least in the case of Rumsfeld, and I suspect in other cases, he had a parallel transition team. He had a few of the people that were close to him. Fortunately, I was one of them. I interviewed every major candidate for Secretary of the Army, Secretary of the Navy, Secretary of the Air Force. And that had nothing to do with the transition team. So if you're an undersecretary, which is the third level from the top, or a service secretary, Army, Navy, Air Force, or deputy secretary, it's going to be the Secretary of Defense, maybe tussling with the White House, maybe getting White House okay, who chooses those folks. But the transition team is important, and a number of the people on the transition team, they will become senior defense officials themselves. Michelle Flournoy, who everybody thinks will be the Secretary of Defense, and she would be the first female Secretary of Defense, but you never know. And that's another thing. You never know. Everybody loves to speculate about names, mostly about names of people they know. But Michelle, if she gets the job, she was the head of the transition team when Obama took over. And one thing that a transition team definitely does is tell the old crowd to get out. I remember my son Roger at the time was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense in the final stages of the Bush administration. When Obama came in, he knew Michelle. He went in and saw Michelle. Michelle said, "Roger, you're not sticking around." It was a friendly kind of thing, but nevertheless, that's how it works. And there are a number of people on the current transition team who might move up. Kath Hicks, who is a vice president of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Washington think tank. Kath was a deputy undersecretary in the Obama years. And it's at least a 50-50 bet that she'll move up to something better. Michelle Howard, who was the first, I believe, African-American female four-star admiral, is on the transition team. And Michelle Howard may well be in charge of one of the service departments. She happens to be fantastic. She should have been promoted even higher than she was. But in any event, you could see her coming back. Another person who might come back is Mike McCord, who's also on the transition team and had my old job. He was comptroller in the last 2 years of the Obama administration. A number of comptrollers moved up to be Deputy Secretary of Defense. The current Deputy Secretary, David Norquist, was comptroller. He also happened to be my deputy when I was comptroller. And he moved up, and Mike McCord might move into that job. And as you go down the list, you will find that every member of the transition team is someone who has experience of the department. And that applies to the State Department as well, and all the other departments. And one reason why Mr. Biden is not so uptight about the transition not formally beginning is because he knows these people know their stuff already. They've been interacting with the various departments that they're working on for quite some time. They know who the players are. A lot of them know what the intelligence is. And so why worry? Why make a fuss? Why get into a contest with President Trump while he's still talking about going to the courts and so on? I think Biden's being very, very smart about this, but Biden's been around. I mean, it's not that he's there 47 years and therefore he's over the hill. It's that he's been in the Senate and in government for 47 years and knows where skeletons are buried. He knows how you play this game. He knows how to work with people, which will bring me, I guess, to his relationship with Senator McConnell. Now, Senator McConnell's already been making noises about how, he's not going to give Biden anything. He didn't give Obama anything, and he's going to do the same thing again. Well, it's not going to be the same. And the reason it's not going to be the same is because even if the Democrats don't take both Georgia Senate seats, and they might not, for the simple reason that whereas Kelly Loeffler, who was an appointee and is a disaster, frankly, even for Republicans, she only pulled about 30% of the vote the first time around. So when they have the January 11th rerun, it's not very likely she's going to win. The question is whether David Perdue will win, but he got 49%, so he's almost there. And if they split, then you have 51 Republicans and 49 Democrats. If the Democrats win both seats, it's 50-50, and then Vice President Harris would be the casting vote. But everybody thinks, well, if the Republicans keep the Senate at 51-49, we're back to where we were under Obama. No, we're not. And the reason we're not is you've got 4 senators at least who are not Trumpists and who could vote with the Democrats on certain issues. And those 4 are Susan Collins, who just won again and is basically a moderate. You've got Murkowski from Alaska, who's a moderate. You've got Romney, who's already defied Trump on just about every occasion. And then you've got Ben Sasse, who started out as an anti-Trumper and then decided that maybe discretion was the better part of valor. And so he sucked up to Mr. Trump, and now he's an anti-Trumper again. He's no Winston Churchill, who changed his party several times, but nevertheless, he is no longer a guaranteed vote for McConnell. And McConnell, who's as smart as anything. You may not like him, you may not like his policies, but boy, he's smart. He's been around a long time, almost as long as Biden. He'll count noses, and he will compromise, just as Biden is going to compromise. Now, that's going to upset the extreme left, and it's going to upset the extreme right. But these 2 men, McConnell and Biden, are going to use each other as excuses. Biden's going to tell the extreme left, hey, I did what I could, but, McConnell, it's amazing that I got him to compromise at all. McConnell will turn around to the extreme right guys like Hawley and Ted Cruz and say, what do you want from me? I did the best I could. So I think we're going to go down a moderate path. And you got to remember one other thing. Biden and McConnell actually co-sponsored bills together in the Senate. And they were colleagues for more than a quarter century. And in 2012, when Biden was vice president, he was the one that cut the tax deal with McConnell. They worked together. And as I say, they've both been around. And what that means is you're going to see a much more modulated American policy. Now, there are certain things that both parties agree on. They haven't figured out how to agree. Infrastructure is a good example of that. The courts, I think, the Supreme Court looks like it's going to uphold Obamacare. It's going to be hard for Biden to expand it. It's going to be hard for McConnell to cut it back. So those 2, I think, on infrastructure, you might see progress. On Obamacare, you're not going to see in the area I know a little bit better, which is foreign and defense policy. People don't realize that the Trump budget for the next 5 years really, in what's called real terms, that is to say, without inflation, already involved cuts in defense spending. Not big ones. And when you're spending about $700 billion a year, that's not chump change. And when I was comptroller, we were only spending $450 billion a year. And I once figured out how much that meant I was spending every minute. It was a lot of money, a lot more than most people earn in a lifetime. So now they're at 700 billion. So even if there's no growth, that's a lot of money to spend. Biden, again, is not likely to choose people in the Defense Department that are going to be budget cutters. They will probably argue to maintain the budget as best they can. And there will be cuts, but not, for instance, like the extreme left wants, 10% cuts a year, which would amount to $70 billion a year. It's just not going to happen. And Biden will do some things. He's talked about doing it. He's actually started to do it, talking to allies, talking to friends, healing the breaches that have taken place between us and our allies. There are 2 allies that I think are going to find themselves no longer in the best books of the White House. That's the Saudis and the Israelis. The Saudis primarily for 2 reasons. One, because the Democrats really are very much concerned about the human rights record, and also because of Saudi Arabia's continuing war in Yemen. And Yemen is just a total disaster area. And Prince Mohammed bin Salman is not very popular on the Hill. or amongst the State Department diplomats. So you might see not so much a cutting off of Saudi Arabia, but just a toning down of the buddy-buddyship that Mr. Trump had with Prince Mohammed. The same thing with Prime Minister Netanyahu. He's now saying, well, I've known Biden a million years and we've been friends and so on. Sure, fine. It reminds me of when it became clear that I was going into the administration, everybody started calling me to catch up. What did catching up mean? Well, they wanted to talk to me and hopefully I'd recommend them for a job. And it got so bad that I started a catching up file for all these people who hadn't spoken to me in ages and all of a sudden were catching up. And I wanted to see who would win the prize for going the longest without being in touch and then catching up. And one guy won the prize. He hadn't been in touch with me 20 years. And all of a sudden he wanted to catch up. He had a lot of catching up to do, but I didn't bother to catch up with him. So Netanyahu basically is playing the catching up game. And it's not going to work with Biden. And it certainly won't work with his advisors. They're not going to roll back Jerusalem embassies. They're not going to roll back peace with the Emirates or with Bahrain or even with Sudan, because why do it? On the other hand, they are going to be much more concerned about illegal settlements. By the way, there's a settlement named after Mr. Trump now. It's called Trump Heights. If I were an Israeli, I would rename it pretty quickly. But anyway, they are not going to be sympathetic. And who are the people who are around Mr. Trump? I don't know if they'll be Secretary of State or Secretary of or National Security Advisor. I don't know what jobs these folks are going to get. But Susan Rice is no fan of Mr. Netanyahu, and she's a candidate for Secretary of State. Nick Burns, who's up at Harvard, another candidate for Secretary of State, not anti-Israel, just no fan of Netanyahu and his policies. Another candidate is Bill Burns, who runs the Carnegie Endowment right now, and he's the one who negotiated with the Iranians for the Iranian nuclear deal. Well, that wasn't one that Mr. Netanyahu supported, as you recall. And so he's no fan of Mr. Netanyahu. And finally, Tony Blinken, who is probably the closest of all of them to Mr. Biden. Tony actually runs the Biden Center at the University of Delaware, I think it is. He's probably going to be National Security Advisor. He could be Secretary of State. And he, too, is no fan of Netanyahu's. So you're going to see a kind of demotion of those two allies. On the other hand, look for Mr. Biden to get much, much closer to Germany. We already have a great relationship with the French, at least on the military side. Boris Johnson, who's nobody's fool, the Prime Minister of Britain, he was good buddies with Trump, but he dropped him like a hot potato, and he was one of the first to call Mr. Biden and congratulate him. And there will be other countries that Biden will reach out to. Some countries are really worried. Poland, for example, it's become more and more autocratic. It desperately needs the United States. It was going to build Camp Trump, literally a base for our forces there. And they're nervous about where the Biden administration might land on their issues. But the fact is that Poland is a pretty important place for us to be operating and training, given that they're next door to Russia. And that brings me to Russia and China. There is a consensus in Washington. Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, we don't like Russia. There are three countries that nobody likes right now: Russia, China, and Turkey. And I'll deal with each of them. Russia, because the left sees Putin as an autocrat who's destroying human rights. The right, because it sees Putin as somebody who invaded Ukraine, who seized the Crimea, and is a threat to NATO. So both sides, absolutely negative. Same with China. The left, because of China's awful human rights record, what they're doing to the Uyghurs, for instance, the Muslim Uyghurs up in Xinjiang, they basically have concentration camps there. The right, because China's become a military threat in Southeast Asia. Everybody's read about the South China Sea and how the Chinese are bullying all the Southeast Asian countries, most of whom are our friends, some of whom are our allies. So whether you're right or left, you don't like China, and everybody agrees that China's been stealing our intellectual property. That's how they've gotten as far as they've got. And that China hasn't been playing fair on trade. Now, I think where the Biden people might be different, and frankly, in my view, should be different, is not focusing on tariffs. Tariffs hurt us, not the Chinese. And Chinese are finding other markets anyway. We have to figure out a way to block their intellectual property theft. And maybe through quotas as opposed to tariffs or non-tariff barriers, we can find a way to really pressure the Chinese. But there's a consensus, and there's also a growing consensus about Taiwan, which didn't really exist even 5 years ago. As you know, Taiwan is basically, not basically, it is a democracy, and it's an independent country without declaring its independence. And the more threatening the mainland gets to Taiwan, the more Democrats and Republicans are going to circle the wagons around the island. Democrats, again, because it's a democracy. Republicans, because they're opposed to Chinese aggression, and Democrats will agree with them on that as well. And then there's Turkey, which may surprise you unless you've been following these issues closely. The Turkish president has moved his country into an unholy alliance with the Muslim Brotherhood, which includes Hamas, the anti-Israel terrorists that run Gaza, and Qatar, which is at loggerheads with the Saudis, with the Emirates, with Bahrain, with Oman, with all their neighbors, and which has pretty good relations with Iran. Of course, on Iran, and I'll get to that, there isn't a consensus, but on Turkey, there is. Again, the left is upset because the president of Turkey, Mr. Erdogan, keeps throwing journalists in jail and lots of others as well. The jails are full in Turkey. The right, because he's playing footsie with the Russians. He's got a new Russian missile called the S-400 that, if he actually deploys it, will allow Russians to come in to Turkey and not only look at that particular military piece of equipment that they'll help to keep up and manage, but obviously we'll use that opportunity to look at the stuff we've given Turkey. There's also a lot of anger over the way Turkey tried to really go after the Kurds, who were doing our dirty work in Syria. Turkey is meddling in Libya. Turkey is anti-Israel. Turkey is anti-UAE. You look at Turkey's anti-Greece. You look at our friends, and you say, well, Turkey seems to be anti all of them. And by the way, they've almost come to blows with the French in the Eastern Mediterranean. And the French right now are as close to us militarily as the British are, or the Australians. So Turkey is in everybody's bad books as well. When it comes to Iran, here you're going to see a difference. The president-elect clearly would like to revive something like the old nuclear deal. The problem is you're already 5 years into it, number one. Number two, we know the Iranians have violated all sorts of provisions. And by the way, the United Nations inspectors have said that as much. The Iranians are also on the verge of cutting a deal with China, which will allow China to build ports in Iran. And you can use ports for merchant shipping or for naval vessels. They're going to train more with the Iranians on military training. They're going to invest in Iran, which will give them an economic stranglehold over a country that's got real economic problems because we've been sanctioning them. And so the right is very, very worried that a deal with Iran will let them off the hook. Now, the Europeans want to deal with Iran. And Mr. Biden does, and many of his advisors do, because a lot of them negotiated the first deal. But there are two catches. One, as I say, is that we're 5 years into it, and some of these provisions were for 10 years, so there ain't much time. But secondly, the supreme leader, as he's called, of Iran, doesn't want to deal with us anyway. So it's going to take time to negotiate something. And what that is and how that plays out, we just don't know. But The Iran issue is one that does divide Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives. I'm sure I haven't covered the waterfront, but I want to give you guys time to ask questions, and I'll respond as best I can and maybe elaborate on what I've talked about. So over to you all.
So thank you so much, Dov. Let me ask the participants at this point to raise your hand if you'd like to be recognized, and Leah and I will try to keep track of it. So if I can get on gallery view.
Alan, I think you raised your hand, but you're muted.
Oh, no, he's unmuted.
I can't hear you.
Oh,
I see your
can't.
lips moving.
Yeah, I have you as, why don't you try and unmute yourself, Ellen?
So Erie, you're muted. Yeah, while we try to straighten that out, Alan Burko, you have a question.
Alan, I think that you are unmuted. However, we can't hear you. So if you want to try and restart real quick or check your audio settings, or you can send the message in a chat or your question if you.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. If you guys want to ask questions via the chat, then Leah and Larry can look at the chat and transmit your question. That's another way to do it.
Okay, looks like he's typing now. If someone else wants to ask a question. Eric, did you have a question?
Helen Gilbo, you're muted as well. Leah, I'm afraid.
I don't know. We got a problem, but I see that Alan has a question.
Yeah, he should be good now.
The
So
younger
I'll
Al.
answer. Oh, are you on?
Well,
Okay.
Dov, I absolutely agree and understand, I think, everything you said. I still have difficulty in comprehending moving forward with Russia and China and some of these other things, since we've managed to push them into corners to a large extent. And I don't quite understand how to move forward.
Well, I think, part of it is you tone down the rhetoric, regardless of what you think of the other guy. That's number one. We had a problem with Russia because Russia interfered in the 2016 election. This has bothered Mr. Trump to this day. We don't understand his relationship with Putin. It's weird to put, and I'm being very nice about it. Biden's not going to have that. The Russians did not defeat him in the election. He has no gripe about that. He doesn't have a relationship with Putin, which is actually a good thing. So he can, I think, deal with Putin in a very different way. And Putin's no fool either. I mean, I remember in 2001, when we walked away from the anti-ballistic missile treaty, it was the Democrats on the Hill who were more critical of us than the Russians who we walked away from. And who was in charge at that time? Putin. At 9/11, Putin was supportive. I had to deal with the Russians on Afghanistan. One of my sort of secondary jobs was to be the DOD coordinator for Afghanistan. And I remember going with my colleague from the Treasury Department, John Taylor, who was undersecretary over there, and we dealt with the Russians. And we said to them, look, the Afghans have no money. They owe you money. Can you forgive the debt? They forgave the debt. And they wouldn't have done that without Putin's blessing. So it's possible to deal with Putin. And I think that Biden, because he comes in with a clean slate on these two very, very provocative issues, he's got a chance. With China, in some ways it may be harder. But again, if he drops the tariffs and essentially says to them, look, I'm going to impose stuff on you, but let's talk about it. Again, you can do business with China. It's just that they have to understand that we're not going to be a pushover. Kowtow is a Chinese principle that everybody basically bows down to the emperor and does what he wants. We're not going to kowtow. and we can be tough. But that doesn't mean we have to, call a virus the China virus and all that kind of stuff. Tone makes a big difference. And Biden's been around. He's been around the world. He's dealt with all these guys. So he's in a better position, I think, than Trump, who's a blowhard, to actually get something done. I hope that answers your question.
I saw Alan Burkos hand up.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for this. It's been fascinating. First question is, how can you discuss the Senate approving the cabinet for Biden? And secondly, can you discuss Hong Kong and why nobody's done anything about that?
Sure. Well, there's a big debate inside the Democratic Party right now regarding whether the president-elect should nominate so-called progressives. I mean, Bernie Sanders, for instance, is literally lobbying to be Secretary of Labor. And it's madness because, quite frankly, right now, I think he's got a Republican governor. And so he'll name a Republican to the Senate. But, Bernie Sanders is who he is. And he never really pays attention to anybody. In many ways, I've always thought Bernie Sanders was kind of Trump-like without the evil part. Very, very fixed on himself. I'll never forget. I was walking down, I guess it's Maryland Avenue, right near the Capitol one day. And this is when Sanders was a candidate in 2016. And he had his Secret Service detail. And you could see he loved it. He just loved the idea of that. And that's Trump. Every time they play Hail to the Chief, it turns him on. But again, whether it's Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, who, by the way, I had to testify in front of her. I thought she'd kill me. I mean, I'm an out and out Republican, except this time I supported Biden because I support decent people. I thought she'd kill me in this hearing. Actually, the only person who ever really tore me apart in a hearing were two people, Chuck Hagel and Joe Biden. I asked Joe Biden afterwards, "Why'd you do it?" He said, "Well, it was television. Come on." But in the case of Elizabeth Warren, she asked really good questions. She wasn't rude. I mean, she is a brilliant woman, but she's a progressive. And that goes to your question. Can a progressive win the nomination and Senate confirmation? I meant. And the answer probably is no. On that one, I think you'll see if the Republicans have a 51 majority, all 51 of them are going to vote against her. Even though she's a colleague, they're just not going to do it. And certainly not with Bernie Sanders. So that's the other side of the Democratic debate. Those who say, look, why go in there and get defeated? You've just become president. Put in a Democrat who is respected by both sides, but by definition would be a moderate.
How about Susan Rice?
I think Susan may have trouble. I mean, she's a good friend of mine, and I think Susan may have trouble getting through because senators have long memories. And even if they don't have long memories, a lot of their colleagues will remind them. And, she's stuck with this Libya thing. So we'll see. I mean, strictly speaking, senators normally confirm the president's choice. I mean, he's president. But, we're in such a different state right now with the bitterness that's been going on that they might take it out on her. I think she'd be a fine Secretary of State myself, but it ain't up to me. It's up to to Mitch McConnell. I hope I answered your question. Oh, you had two. What was the other one?
Hong Kong.
Oh, Hong Kong. Well, we've done nothing about Hong Kong because A, the president couldn't give a damn about democracy, and B, because he's never wanted to alienate Xi. He has this kind of bifurcated approach to bad countries. North Korea is a bad country. We've got sanctions, this and that. But he and Kim exchanged love letters, as he put it. China gets all kinds of sanctions and tariffs and this and that, but he gets along with Xi. Turkey, he gets along with Erdogan. Russia, he fawns on Putin, doesn't just get along with him. Even though we do things against Russia, and even though, by the way, he was the one, not Obama, who approved arms to the Ukrainians. So it's kind of a split personality on that. And that's why we didn't do anything on Hong Kong.
how about the rest? How about the rest of the world on Hong Kong?
Oh, they won't do anything without our lead. They don't have any clout. The British are the only ones who might have clout, and they've admitted they don't have clout. I mean, what are you going to do to China? What can you do? By the way, China's not the only innocent in this. Years and years ago, India, the world's largest democracy, decided it didn't like the idea that Goa, the island of Goa, belonged to Portugal. So they seized it. End of story. Nobody complained.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
John,
Yeah.
let me ask about how. Turn that
Thank you for this.
how much real.
Ooh,
Sorry.
Wait a minute. I'll mute it.
I think the feedback's
well,
still
we've got a
happening.
question there.
I thought I asked you to
Okay.
do that.
I muted it.
Leah, I guess you should take over.
Yeah, who,
Just muted it.
Al, did you have Alan, or let's see, it's actually,
Oh, you're
Okay.
muted.
I think I just muted you.
So sorry. So one
Okay.
question, I don't know if this is exactly your wheelhouse, but they're about to nominate Judy Shelton for the Fed next week.
Yeah.
When the new administration comes in, can they get how soon, or can they get her out of there?
I suppose they can. It's hard. Look, Ray is on the chopping block, they say, the head of the FBI. He's got a 10-year job. Trump can fire him. It's very hard, though, because it's harder even than with Ray, because the FBI, after all, is a federal agency that's part of the executive branch. The Fed is really meant to be independent.
Fed is meant to be independent.
And so she's probably safe.
Yeah, that's my wheelhouse. All right, it's Mike Capel.
Yeah.
Theoretically, there has never been, unless they can demonstrate wrongdoing, there has never been a Fed governor who has been thrown out.
And Biden's not going to do that for another reason.
No.
He's not going to do it because he doesn't want to inflame he doesn't want to pour oil on the flames that already exist. He doesn't want to make it worse. Salt on the wounds or oil on the flame, whatever metaphor you want to use. He'll live with it. She's only one person, and she'll be outvoted because, a lot of people challenge her approach to economics. But trying to fire her, that's a Trump kind of behavior. That's what's going on in the Pentagon right now, where you have a 34-year-old guy who, was a super Trumpy and now is in charge of all Defense Department intelligence, where you have a Secretary of Defense who 2 years ago was 5 levels below the Secretary of Defense. You've got this kind of stuff going on, and frankly, Biden will be able to change that. But if I were advising Biden on the Fed, it's not my wheelhouse as it is Mike Capel's, but I'm an economist too. I would tell Biden, let it be and work around it. Larry, you've muted yourself, I guess. You're
See
still muted.
how the feedback goes.
How's that?
Now you are. Now you're good.
On the question of the imminent danger over the next 8 weeks, if you, Dov Zakheim, were Machiavelli, and you were advising Kim or the Prime Minister of Turkey, wouldn't you say, hey, the United States, despite all of their great arms, is in chaos. This is the time to strike. This is the time in which they won't know how to respond. This isn't the time in which we'll get part of the American electorate will say, rah, 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 wave the flag, let's defend ourselves. How real is that kind of a threat?
Well, it's a real threat. It could be China firing missiles at Quemoy and Matsu, the Taiwanese islands. It could be Russia staging another exercise in Belarus and never leaving. It could be Kim firing a missile or having a nuclear test, for example. And with the Turks, they could make further incursions into Iraq and Syria. all of those things could happen. Then the question will be, what will Trump do? Because the military is not going to do anything without the order from the commander in chief. That's the big worry that a lot of people have. I don't have an answer to that. And if I were advising those guys, I would say, yeah, you'll get away with it for 8 weeks. But what happens after 8 weeks? What happens to you? And
Well,
that's the saving grace. Because if Biden is confronted with one of those kinds of contingencies, he's going to have a united Democratic Party and united Republican Party behind him if he wants to hit back. And the reason is the Democrats are not going to want to be seen as weaklings, and the Republicans are not going to want to be seen as weaker than the Democrats. So, yeah, it's a good move for the next 8 weeks. But by the 9th week, it'll look pretty dumb.
I mean, but if we look back, way back to the Nixon administration and the fears that you were familiar with of misuse of power, of Joint Chiefs having to put their thumb down on misadventures, do we risk returning to those evil days?
Well, he wants to, I'll give you an example. He wants to pull all the troops out of Afghanistan now. The military thinks it's a really dumb idea. Biden has said he doesn't want to keep a lot of troops there, but he wants to keep some. And I think the military can live with that. So what'll happen? First of all, if you recall, General Dunford, the previous chairman of the Joint Chiefs, he got all these orders, but they were all by tweet. And so Dunford said, that's not an order for me. I need a written order from the Secretary of Defense, and the Secretary of Defense needs a written order from the White House. That's how it works. Well, he never got them because Trump's mind moved on to other things, and nothing happened. So the first thing that'll happen is if Trump really, sends out a tweet at 3:30 in the morning, the old joke about Trump at 3:30 in the morning, don't you? Why does Trump tweet at 3:30 in the morning? Well, all of us at our age get up at 3:30 in the morning because we all have to do our business, but the rest of us go back to bed. He tweets. So he'll send a tweet out, and it'll say, I don't know, pull the troops out of Afghanistan. General Milley is going to say, that's not good enough. I need an order. So the order has to be generated. The Secretary of Defense, this guy, Miller, who seems a straightforward guy, he's just well over his head, then transmits the order to the general, chairman of the Joint Chiefs. At that point, what the military is really, really, really good at is dragging its heels. And so they'll say, well, wait a minute, we don't have the logistics ready. We got to get everything in order. This takes time. And they'll take time, and they'll take time. And all of a sudden, it's January 20th at noon. That's what I think will happen. And of course, if he gives an illegal order, they won't listen to it. The Uniform Code of Military Justice specifically says you don't listen to an illegal order. In fact, this question was put to the current vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs at an international conference, and he said, no, I wouldn't follow an illegal order. So forget about illegal orders, but legal ones, they will simply stall and stall and stall if it's not in the national interest.
Well, that's a relief. Other questions?
Yeah, Vicky.
Vicky, we have to unmute Vicky.
I'm working on it. There's just often a delay. There we go.
And you have to unmute yourself, Larry.
I'll mute-
We never
I'll mute
on
Larry.
two computers the same. Turn up the volume?
Yes.
Oh, wait a minute.
I hear you.
It's okay. We
It's
can hear
usually not
Vicky, and
this
the
hard to
feedback,
express my
is
opinion,
fine.
I don't see.
You're fine, Vicky. We can hear
Where
you.
the volume is.
No,
Go ahead.
oh, I thought you, okay.
Right.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to ask your opinion, Dov. Do you have a feeling that there is a way to get around the egregious divide in this country? I know that Biden has done nothing but talk about unity, but I don't think unity arrives on the heels of a statement.
Well, if I were advising him, I would say, who's your target? Your target is the non-college graduate white male. Those are your targets. A lot of them out there. And so what you do is you formulate policies that will appeal to them. So policies that may be job training for them or just jobs for them. But that should be your target. And to the extent that you do that, you then have Mitch McConnell in a box. Because if he is seen to be opposing things that you are doing to help those people, that group of people, they're going to turn on him. And even if he supports it, you take the credit because you're the president. So that's the way to heal this country. Look, there's a significant proportion of this country that are bigots, racists, and anti-immigrant. You're not going to change them. We know that. They're out there. But that's not, in my view, the majority of Trump voters. It's just not. A lot of them are fearful. They're fearful about their culture. They're fearful about, all of a sudden there'll be all kinds of no restrictions on abortion or whatever it might be. Well, there are ways to work these problems, but the key is to work them in a way that has that group of people in mind. And then what he was able to pull off in Michigan and in Wisconsin and in Pennsylvania, he'll be able to spread to other states. If, on the other hand, he follows this, let's just, beat them up, the hell with them, the way, frankly, Hillary Clinton did. They're these are the people that they're irredeemable. Then the Democrats are in trouble. You don't call people irredeemable. Racists, yeah, but nobody else. That's my answer.
Well, that's an interesting answer. And I'm also concerned that Trump is going to hang around in a very big way. There's talk that he wants to set up his own television program that will have more viewers than anybody, and he'll destroy Fox because it finally ratted on him. And he's got a very strong following, obviously.
Yeah, he does. But again, first of all, he won't be president. So yeah, he can be a radio talk show host or a television talk show host. And all people have to do is switch channels. That's number one. You don't switch channels on the president as easily as you switch channels on even on a Hannity or something. The other thing is the reason I think he's desperate to stay in the White House is he knows that within days of leaving the White House, he's going to be indicted.
Yep.
And he's not going to, he can't pardon himself with regard to state law. The Manhattan District Attorney, Cyrus Vance Jr., whose father, by the way, was Jimmy Carter's Secretary of State. And then what's her name? Loretta, the Attorney General of New York, who wants to run for governor. Those two people are after him. And they're going to force his taxes out into the open, which will already show that he's, full of beans. He will find himself having to fight bankruptcy issues. He may find himself convicted of tax fraud. He doesn't know where it ends because none of us know where it ends. Loretta James, by the way, is her name. Nobody knows where it'll end, but it ain't going to be good. And the further they push this down the road, and they will, down the road to conviction, the more difficult it's going to be for him to maintain his credibility. So it ain't all golden for him after he leaves the White House.
But while he's a lame duck, could he pardon himself?
Sure, he can pardon himself, but he can't pardon himself for state law. It doesn't apply. That's why they're going after him. You see what I mean? That's the problem.
Okay, this is
For him, that is.
I know,
this
thank
has
you.
been fascinating, Dov. We all appreciate it very, very, very much. Tell your neighbors, those of you who are around the valley, that they can watch this entire recording on the Race Center website. And we look forward to being with you on next Friday at 7:30.
And I look forward to seeing my neighbors while I'm walking Charlie, my dog, or any other time. Stay safe, be healthy, and look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank
Stay
you
safe.
so much, Dov.
Sure. Bye
a good
now.
evening, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.